The entire Blackwood estate suddenly fell into silence, not because a gunshot cracked the air, not because someone dropped to the floor, but because someone had just done what no one had dared to even imagine for the past 3 years. In the middle of the grand living room, beneath a crystal chandelier worth millions of dollars, Veronica Hayes, the beautiful fiancée of the most feared Mafia boss in New York, lifted her hand with a cold, razor-sharp intent, ready to slap an elderly cook the way she had so many times before. Everyone froze. The servants, the bodyguards, the butler. Even men who had killed without blinking held their breath. They knew what was about to happen. Veronica always slapped people when she was angry, and today she was furious. But something strange happened. A thin, pale hand caught her wrist, not gently, not with trembling fear, but with the firm refusal of a small tree that will not bow to the storm. It was the new maid, Isla, a quiet girl, a girl who had been working here for only 3 days, a girl so gaunt she looked sickly, the kind no one would expect to so much as lift her eyes, let alone seize the Mafia boss's fiancé by the wrist in front of everyone. Yet she stood there, holding Veronica's raised arm, and she did not let go. Mouths fell open. "What? You think you can do this, huh?" Veronica screamed, so shocked her whole body shook. But Isla did not release her. Her hand stayed steady, her gaze stayed calm, the gaze of someone who had endured too much suffering to still know what fear is. And in that moment, no one knew that Adrian Blackwood himself, the most powerful Mafia boss in New York, was standing just outside in the corridor. He stopped. He heard the screaming. Slowly, he turned his head. Then he saw everything. His fiancée was about to slap an old servant, and a frail, pale maid was stopping her. Adrian did not move. He did not say a word. He only watched, his eyes cold as ice, and then something strange flickered within them, because in 3 years, no one had ever dared to stand up to Veronica. No one. And the next thing Veronica shouted sent a tremor through the entire room. "Let me go. I said let go. Right now. Do you even know who I am?" But Isla's hand did not so much as twitch. That moment, just that one moment, would change everything. Then a sharp, shocked gasp rippled through the room, because something even more unbelievable happened. Veronica tried to jerk her arm free, but she could not. Her face flushed crimson. Her eyes went wide. She struggled harder. Still, it was useless. Everyone stared at the new maid in stunned disbelief. Where could that gaunt girl have found such strength? Adrian watched from the shadows, his eyes narrowing. Adrian watched from the shadows, his eyes narrowing. He thought to himself, "What kind of monster have I brought into my home?" Just as he stepped forward, someone else entered behind him. Someone who should not have been here. Someone whose very presence was enough to drain the color from Veronica's face. But before we can learn who it is, we need to turn back time. Back 15 years. Back to a storm-soaked night in the Brooklyn slums. Back to a 13-year-old boy lying half dead in a pool of blood. And back to the little girl who saved his life. Because everything that happened in that living room today had begun a long time ago. Long before Isla ever set foot in the Blackwood estate. Long before Veronica ever heard the name Adrian Blackwood. If you want to know what terrifying secret is waiting ahead, please tap like to support the channel. Share this video with anyone who loves stories filled with emotion. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the most unexpected twists. Brooklyn, 15 years earlier. A rainy night in November. 13-year-old Adrian Blackwood lay curled in a dark alley behind a crumbling old apartment block. Blood streamed from 3 stab wounds in his body. One in his stomach, one in his chest, one in his back. Rain poured down as if the sky itself were weeping, yet it couldn't wash away the widening pool of blood spreading beneath him. He didn't cry. He'd forgotten how to cry a long time ago. It had started with his father, a weak man, addicted to alcohol and gambling. He owed money to a gang in the slums. Not a little, a lot. So much they'd run out of patience. That night, 3 men stormed into the miserable apartment the 2 of them lived in. They demanded payment. His father dropped to his knees and begged. But begging didn't buy food. Begging certainly didn't pay a debt. If you don't have the money, your son will pay instead. Adrian remembered those words. Cold, cruel, without a flicker of hesitation. Then the blade went into him. The first time, the second, the third. He didn't even have time to scream. He only felt pain. Pain as if someone were tearing his body apart piece by piece. His father howled, but he did nothing. He only stood there, shaking, watching his son collapse. "This is a lesson," one of the men said. "Next week, if there's no money, the kid dies." Then they left, leaving Adrian in his own blood. And his father left too. Adrian didn't know where he went. Maybe to hide, maybe to drink, maybe to find a way to borrow more money. But he didn't take Adrian to a hospital. He didn't call an ambulance. He simply vanished into the night as if Adrian had never existed. Adrian dragged himself out, inch by inch, inch by inch. Blood dripped in a long trail across the icy concrete. He crawled past the stairs, crawled through the hallway, crawled out into the alley behind the building. Then he collapsed. He had nothing left to give. Rain hammered his face, biting cold. But he couldn't feel the cold anymore. He only felt tired, so tired he wanted to close his eyes and never open them again. Maybe dying would be better, he thought. Does anyone even care? His mother had left when he was small. His father had never loved him. He had no friends, no family, no one. 13 years old, dying in a dark alley. And nobody knew. Adrian closed his eyes. He heard the rain. He heard water gurgling in the drain. He heard his heart beating weaker and weaker, weaker and weaker. Is this how I die? He wondered. Alone, in the dark, like a stray dog. He didn't feel bitterness. He was too exhausted for bitterness. He only wanted it to end, quickly, quietly. But just as he thought he was about to sink into the darkness forever, a voice rang out. Small, trembling, but clear. Hey, are you okay? Adrian tried to open his eyes. Everything was blurred. But he saw a figure standing over him. Small, thin, soaked through by the rain. A little girl. She knelt beside him. Her eyes were wide, frightened, but she didn't run. She put her hand against his chest, feeling the faint, struggling beat of his heart. Don't die, she said, her voice shaking. Do you hear me? Don't you die. Adrian wanted to say something, but he couldn't. His lips moved. No sound came out. The girl didn't wait. She acted, and what she did next changed Adrian's life forever. The girl's name was Isla, 13 years old. So thin she looked almost sickly. Light brown hair plastered to her head by the rain. Old, torn clothes soaked through. Slung over her shoulder was a burlap sack stuffed with empty cans and plastic bottles. She'd been out collecting scraps when she heard a low moan from the dark alley. Anyone else would have run. The Brooklyn slums at night weren't a place for curiosity. But Isla didn't run. She stepped closer, and she saw Adrian. Oh God, she breathed when she saw the blood. So much blood. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She moved, fast and decisive, as if she was used to facing whatever life threw at her. Isla tossed the sack aside. She slipped off the thin jacket she wore, the only thing keeping her warm in the cold, rain-soaked night. Without hesitation, she tore it into long strips. Then she dropped to her knees beside Adrian. You have to live, she said, her voice trembling but her hands steady. Do you hear me? You have to live. She wrapped the cloth tight around the wound in Adrian's stomach, pulled hard. Adrian groaned in pain. But Isla didn't stop. She kept going, binding the wound in his chest, then the one in his back. Blood soaked through the fabric almost immediately, but at least it slowed. I'm going to get you there, Isla said. Hang on. Adrian wanted to tell her she couldn't. She was too small, too thin, and he weighed far more than she did, but he couldn't get the words out. He could only stare at her through eyes that were already dimming. Isla didn't care about logic. She slid her arms under Adrian's, hauled him up. He was heavy, so heavy, but she clenched her teeth, braced herself, and dragged him forward one step at a time. The rain kept pounding. The ground was slick. Isla fell. She got up. She dragged Adrian again. She fell again. She stood again. Over and over. Over and over. The clinic, she panted. Just 2 blocks more. Stay with me. Adrian didn't know how he was still alive. Maybe because the girl wouldn't allow him to die. Maybe because those thin arms kept pulling him forward, refusing to let go. In the middle of the street, when Adrian was almost gone, she began to sing. Her voice was small, shaking, nearly swallowed by the rain. but Adrian could still hear it. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." It was a lullaby, but she sang the words wrong. Near the end, instead of singing it as it should be, she sang, "And if that horse and cart fall down, you'll still be the sweetest little baby in town." Wrong, completely wrong, but Adrian didn't care. That voice kept him awake. That voice gave him something to hold on to. At last, they reached the clinic. Isla kicked the door and cried out, "Help! Please, help!" Everything after that turned into chaos. People rushed in. People shouted. They lifted Adrian onto a stretcher. Someone called an ambulance. Before Adrian was wheeled away, the girl grabbed his hand. From her own wrist, she slipped off a bracelet braided from red thread. Old, frayed, but she placed it in Adrian's palm as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. "Keep it," she said, her eyes rimmed red. "It'll bring you luck." Adrian forced his mouth to move. "What's your name?" His voice was raw, almost no sound at all. The girl smiled, a sad smile but warm. "Call me Star," she said, "because I like looking at the stars." Then the stretcher rolled away. Adrian tried to turn his head to look back at her, but his vision was too blurred, and his consciousness was slipping into darkness. 3 days later, Adrian woke up in the hospital. He lay on white sheets, wrapped in bandages, machines beeping steadily at his side. A nurse stood nearby, checking his IV. "The boy's awake," she called out. "You're very lucky. Another minute and you might not have made it." Adrian didn't care that he was lucky. He cared about one thing. "The girl," he rasped. "The girl who brought me here. Where is she?" The nurse frowned. "What girl?" "She was small, thin, light brown hair. She saved me." The nurse shook her head. "When the ambulance got to the clinic, you were alone. There was no one else." Adrian's heart tightened. "That can't be. She was there. She gave me." He looked down at his hand, and he saw it. The braided red thread bracelet, still there, wrapped around his wrist. So the girl had been real. She had saved him, and then she vanished. Adrian clenched the red thread, tears sliding down his cheeks. For the first time in years, he cried. Not from pain, but because someone hadn't abandoned him. Because someone had torn up her own jacket in a freezing rain to save a stranger. Because someone had sung to him while he was dying. "Star," he whispered, staring up at the blank white ceiling. "I'll find you. Even if it takes my whole life, I'll find you." And that vow, the 13-year-old boy made it, and he kept it for 15 years. 15 years later, Adrian Blackwood was no longer the gaunt boy bleeding out in a dark alley. Now his name made all of New York tremble. The most powerful mafia boss in the city. A 28-year-old man with an underworld empire stretching from Manhattan to Brooklyn. People said that if Adrian Blackwood simply nodded, a person could rise into wealth and comfort. And if he shook his head, that person could vanish without a trace. From the child abandoned by his father on a rain-soaked night, Adrian had built everything with nothing but his bare hands, with blood, with sweat, with a merciless cruelty toward his enemies. He trusted no one, loved no one, forgave no one. His heart had frozen on the night his father ran, leaving him to die. But there was one thing Adrian had kept close for 15 years. Something no one was allowed to touch. Something he wore on his wrist every day and never took off. The bracelet braided from red thread. It was old and worn. The red had faded into a dusty rose, but Adrian wore it as if it were the most precious thing in the world, because it was the only thing that reminded him that someone, once, had not abandoned him. The girl named Star. Adrian had spent millions of dollars trying to find her. He hired the best private investigators, turned hospitals upside down for records, questioned people all across the Brooklyn slums from back then, but no one knew who she was. No one remembered a 13-year-old child collecting cans in the rain. It was as if she had never existed. 12 years passed. Adrian nearly gave up. Then, 3 years ago, she appeared. Veronica Hayes, 27 years old, beautiful like a painting, hair like molten gold, eyes as blue as the sea, a smile so alluring it could make men forget their own names. She came to Adrian with a perfect story. "I'm the one who saved you that night," Veronica said, her eyes shining with tears. "I'm your Star." Adrian didn't believe her right away. He'd met too many imposters over those 12 years. People eager to exploit his gratitude. People who wanted money, power, protection from the city's most feared man. But Veronica was different. She had proof. She knew about the scar on Adrian's back. She knew about the alley behind the apartment building. She knew about the clinic 2 blocks away. She even knew the lullaby the girl had sung that night. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word." Veronica sang softly, her voice sweet as honey, and she had a bracelet braided from red thread. "This is the other one," she said. "That night I braided 2. One for you, one I kept." Adrian stared at the red thread in Veronica's hand. It looked exactly like the one he wore. Old, frayed. The red faded. His heart stumbled out of rhythm. After 12 years of searching, had he finally found her? Adrian didn't know that Veronica had spent 2 years preparing for this moment. She hired a detective to dig into Adrian's past, bought information from people in the slums, questioned doctors and nurses from the hospital years ago. She learned everything, every smallest detail, and she had a fake red bracelet made, soaking it in tea so it would look old, as if it had truly aged for 15 years. All for one purpose, to become the fiancée of the most powerful mafia boss in New York. And she succeeded. Adrian believed her. He brought her into the Blackwood estate. He spoiled her like a treasure. He gave her everything she wanted: money, jewelry, power. He even promised to marry her, because to Adrian, Veronica wasn't only a lover, she was a savior, the only person who had not abandoned him, the angel who had pulled him back from the dark. He had no idea he was loving an imposter. 3 years passed. The wedding was planned. The news spread everywhere. The biggest newspapers in New York ran the story of the wedding of the century. Mafia boss Adrian Blackwood to marry the mysterious woman who saved his life 15 years ago. Photos of Adrian and Veronica appeared on the front page. They stood side by side, Veronica smiling brilliantly, Adrian as cold as ever, yet his hand still resting lightly at her waist. That newspaper was circulated across the United States, and in a faraway small town, there was a man who saw it. He stared at the photo of Veronica Hayes. His eyes turned bloodshot, his jaw clenched tight. His hand shook as he held the paper. "You," he whispered, his voice thick with hatred. "I finally found you." That man's name was Daniel Porter, and he had a blood debt to collect from Veronica Hayes, a debt from 5 years ago, a debt with his sister's name on it. But that is a story for later. For now, inside the Blackwood estate, Veronica Hayes was living the sweetest days of her life. She didn't know a storm was coming. She didn't know the past was about to knock at her door. She didn't know that in only a few weeks, a frail maid named Isla would walk into this mansion, and everything would fall apart. But behind that sweet smile and that flawless appearance, Veronica Hayes was someone else entirely. Whenever Adrian left the estate, her true face came out. No more gentle voice, no more enchanting smile, no more loving eyes. In their place came cruelty, arrogance, and a viciousness she didn't even bother to hide. "You useless trash. You call this clean?" Veronica's screaming echoed through the mansion whenever Adrian was away. She hurled objects at the staff. She slapped anyone who dared to meet her gaze. She made them kneel when they spoke to her. "Look down. You don't deserve to look at my face." The servants in the Blackwood estate lived in fear. They knew who Veronica really was. They knew how she treated them. But no one dared to speak. Not a single person. Because Veronica was Adrian Blackwood's fiancée, the mafia boss's savior, the woman he loved and protected. Who would dare say a word against her? Who would accuse her? Adrian wouldn't believe it, and the consequences would be horrific. So they stayed silent. They lowered their heads. They endured. They accepted the beatings, the curses, the daily humiliation. As long as when Adrian was present, everything would be calm again. Veronica would turn sweet again, and they would be safe. But there was one man who didn't stay silent, at least not entirely. Harrison Cole, Adrian's loyal butler. 62 years old, hair white as snow, back bent with age, yet his eyes were still sharp as blades. He had been with Adrian since Adrian was 15, newly discharged from the hospital. He watched the boy grow up, watched him build an empire, watched him become the most powerful boss in New York, and he loved him like his own son. That was why Harrison couldn't look away while Veronica tormented the staff. He knew something was wrong. He'd felt it from the very first day she stepped into the estate. But he couldn't tell Adrian. Not yet. Adrian loved Veronica. He believed she was his savior, the angel who had saved his life. If Harrison said she was a bad woman without proof, Adrian wouldn't believe him. Worse, It would break his heart. And Harrison didn't want to hurt the child he'd raised for 13 years. So Harrison chose to investigate. Quietly, carefully, without letting anyone know. He began collecting information about Veronica Hayes, about her family, her past, the years before she appeared in front of Adrian. He hired private investigators. He examined every smallest detail in the story she told, and the more he uncovered, the more he doubted. Veronica said she'd grown up in Brooklyn, but no one in the slums remembered her face. She said she'd collected cans at 13, yet there were no records showing her family had ever lived there. She said she had a star-shaped birthmark behind her right ear, just like the girl from that night, but Harrison had never seen that mark. Something didn't fit. Something was wrong, but Harrison needed proof, hard proof, proof that couldn't be denied. He couldn't go to Adrian with nothing but vague suspicion. He needed something concrete, something that could prove Veronica Hayes was an imposter. And after 2 years of digging, he almost had it. An email Veronica had sent to a private investigator 3 years earlier. In it, she asked the investigator to dig up everything about the night Adrian was stabbed, about the alley, the clinic, the lullaby, the red bracelet. If Veronica truly was the one who saved Adrian, why would she need to hire someone to investigate her own memories? Harrison gripped the printed email in his hand. At last, he had what he needed, but before he could bring it to Adrian, everything happened. The new maid named Isla walked into the Blackwood estate, and everything began to change. Isla Monroe was 28 years old, but her eyes were far older than her age. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much suffering, endured too much injustice, cried too many tears until there were no tears left to cry. Her life was a long chain of tragedies. At 13, she saved a boy who was dying in a dark alley. She didn't know that one act would change both their fates. She only knew she couldn't leave a life behind when it was begging for help. At 14, her mother died. She was a woman addicted to alcohol, living on public assistance, and whatever Isla could scavenge. She wasn't a good mother. She often drank herself senseless and forgot to feed Isla, but she was still the only person Isla had in the world. One night, she drank too much. She suffered alcohol poisoning and never woke up again. Isla became an orphan, 14 years old. No father, no mother, no relatives, no one. She was sent to an orphanage on the outskirts of New York. It wasn't hell, but it wasn't heaven either. She was bullied for being too thin, too timid, too different. The other children mocked her, called her a stick, a ghost, useless. Isla didn't fight back. She only lowered her head and endured. She was used to enduring. But in the darkness of that orphanage, there was a small light. Martha, an older social worker already retired, who sometimes came to volunteer, she saw Isla, saw the sadness in her eyes, saw the loneliness in every careful movement, and she decided to become Isla's foster mother. Martha wasn't rich. She lived in a small apartment on a modest pension, but she gave Isla what she had never had: love, care, a real home. 4 years with Martha were the happiest 4 years of Isla's life. At 18, Isla aged out. She had to stand on her own, earn her own living. Martha was growing frail, and she couldn't support Isla forever. Isla understood. She left that small apartment with a few worn clothes, and Martha's final instructions: be kind, my girl, no matter how cruel life is to you. Over the next 10 years, Isla did every job she could find: washing dishes in restaurants, cleaning floors for the wealthy, serving drinks in bars. She worked 16 hours a day, saved every dollar, and sent what she could back to Martha. Then tragedy struck again. 3 years ago, Isla worked as a maid for a wealthy family in Boston. The lady of the house was cruel, frequently beating the staff. Isla saw it. She couldn't stay silent. She chose to speak up. It was the biggest mistake of her life. The mistress framed Isla for stealing jewelry. Isla was fired. Her name was dragged through the dirt. She was blacklisted by every employment agency. No one believed her. No one listened. She was just a poor maid, and the mistress was rich and powerful. Who would stand on Isla's side? Isla lost her job, her reputation, her faith in justice, and the lesson she learned was silence. Never speak up. Never accuse anyone, because no one believes people like her. 2 months ago, Martha was diagnosed with terminal cancer. The doctor said she needed surgery immediately, then constant chemotherapy. The cost was a number Isla could never reach. She was desperate. She begged everywhere. She offered to do any work at all, as long as she could earn enough to save the woman who had been a mother to her. Then she saw the job posting at the Blackwood estate. Triple the usual pay. Room and board included. Paid weekly. Isla didn't have to think. She applied immediately, and she was hired. On her first day stepping into the Blackwood estate, Isla felt as if she'd walked into another world. Lavish, glittering, overwhelming. She had never seen a place so beautiful. But it wasn't the beauty of the mansion that left her rooted to the floor. It was the man coming down the staircase. Adrian Blackwood, the Mafia boss, the owner of the estate. Isla recognized him instantly. That face, those eyes. Even after 15 years, even though he had changed from a gaunt boy into a powerful man, she still knew him. The boy she had saved in that alley so long ago, and on his wrist, she saw it. The bracelet braided from red thread, worn, faded, but still there. After 15 years, he had kept it. Isla's heart slipped into a wild, uneven beat. She wanted to run to him, to tell him she was the one who had saved him, to tell him she was his star. But then she saw Veronica Hayes, the beautiful woman on Adrian's arm, the woman introduced as the boss's fiancée, the woman everyone said was the savior who had rescued Adrian all those years ago. Isla understood at once. She was an imposter, but Isla said nothing. She remembered Boston, remembered the feeling of being framed, remembered the pain of not being believed by anyone at all. She was only a poor maid. Veronica was the Mafia boss's fiancée. Who would believe Isla? Who would listen? What proof did she have besides her own memory? No, she wouldn't speak. She wouldn't risk losing her job while her foster mother needed money for treatment. She would stay quiet, work, earn the money, then leave. That was Isla's plan. But fate had its own designs. On the first day, Isla worked from early morning until late at night. She scrubbed floors, cleaned rooms, did laundry. She did whatever she was assigned without a single complaint. She kept her head down whenever she passed Veronica. She avoided Adrian's eyes. She tried to become invisible, to blend into the walls of the mansion. That evening, while Isla was eating in the servants' kitchen, another maid sat down beside her. Her name was Jenny. She'd worked here for 2 years. "You're new, aren't you?" Jenny asked softly. Isla nodded. Jenny glanced around, making sure no one was listening, then lowered her voice. "I'm only warning you once. Stay away from Veronica when she's in a bad mood. Don't look her in the eye. Don't speak to her unless she speaks to you. And most of all, if she wants to hit you, let her. Don't resist. Don't say a word." Isla looked at Jenny and saw the fear in the other woman's eyes. "I understand," Isla said. "Thank you." That night, Isla lay on a narrow bed in the servants' quarters, staring up at the dark ceiling. She thought about Adrian, about the red thread bracelet on his wrist, about Veronica and her lies. But she did nothing. She only closed her eyes and tried to sleep. On the second day, Isla was assigned to clean the second-floor corridor. It was a quiet area, with little foot traffic. She liked that. She could work alone, without worrying about Veronica or anyone else. As she mopped the floor, Isla began to sing, an old habit from childhood. She sang when she worked alone. It made her feel less alone. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." The lullaby from long ago. The song she had sung to a dying boy in a dark alley. She still sang the last part wrong, just as she had 15 years earlier. Isla didn't know someone was standing behind her, listening. Harrison Cole, the old butler. He stood there with his eyes wide, his heart hammering. That song, that melody, that wrong line. He'd heard Adrian mention it hundreds of times over 15 years. It was the song the girl had sung that night. The song no one knew except Adrian and the person who saved him. Yet this new maid was singing it, singing the right tune, singing the wrong part, in exactly the same place. Harrison stepped forward. Isla startled and turned. "Where did you learn that song?" he asked, his voice calm, but his gaze sharp and searching. Isla felt her heart tighten. I don't remember. I've known it since I was little." Harrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded and walked away without another word. But that night, he sat in his office, staring at the notes he'd gathered on Veronica Hayes. Then he wrote a new line beneath them. "The new maid, Isla Monroe, knows the lullaby, needs investigating." The third day, morning, Veronica's scream rang through the mansion. "Where's my diamond ring? Who took my ring?" She stormed into the living room like a hurricane, face flushed red, eyes blazing, her finger jabbing at the trembling servants lined up before her. "Which one of you? Which one did it?" No one answered. No one dared. Then Veronica's eyes stopped on Maggie, the 60-year-old cook, the gentlest woman in the estate. "You," Veronica pointed straight at Maggie's face, "you were in my room this morning cleaning. You took my ring." Maggie trembled and shook her head. "Ma'am, I didn't take it. I swear I didn't." "Shut up." Veronica advanced. Maggie backed away, but not fast enough. Veronica lifted her hand, ready to slap the elderly cook. Everyone stood still. No one moved. No one spoke. But one person didn't remain still. Isla. She stepped forward, and her hand closed around Veronica's wrist. The room froze in that instant. Veronica tried to wrench her arm free, but she couldn't. Her face flushed red with anger and humiliation. She struggled harder, yet Isla's thin hand didn't let go. "Let go of me." I said, "Let go. Right now. Do you even know who I am?" Isla didn't answer. She simply stood there, calm, her eyes holding not a single trace of fear, the eyes of someone who had endured too much to still be afraid. And then, right on that beat, a voice came from the doorway. "What's going on in here?" Everyone turned. Adrian Blackwood stood at the threshold, eyes cold as ice as he took in the scene before him, his fiancée's wrist trapped in a maid's grip, and the maid not trembling at all. Veronica changed in an instant. She yanked her hand away from Isla, rushed to Adrian, tears gathering in her eyes. "Adrian, I was attacked by this maid. She dared to lay hands on me. She needs to be fired immediately." Adrian didn't look at Veronica. He looked at Isla. The frail maid stood still, her hands lowered, her head slightly bowed. She didn't defend herself, didn't explain, didn't beg. "You," Adrian said, his voice low and cold. "Why did you do that?" Isla lifted her head. Her eyes met Adrian's, and for one brief moment, something passed between them, a faint, uncertain recognition, a sense of familiarity that made no sense, and yet wouldn't go away. "I just didn't want Maggie to be hit," Isla said, her voice soft but clear. "She didn't do anything wrong." Veronica screamed, "She's lying. She attacked me first." "Adrian, I'm your fiancé. You have to believe me." Adrian stayed silent. He looked at Veronica, then at Isla, then at the servants trembling all around them. He saw fear in their eyes, fear not of the new maid, but of Veronica. Just then, Harrison walked into the room. The old butler moved quickly, breathing hard, a stack of papers in his hand. He stopped when he saw the tension in the living room, but he didn't address it. He only looked at Adrian, his gaze loaded with meaning. "Sir," Harrison said, "I need to speak with you in private. Right now." Adrian understood. His loyal butler never interrupted him unless it truly mattered. He nodded, then turned to Veronica. "Go to your room. We'll talk later." Veronica refused. She clutched Adrian's sleeve, tears streaming down her face. "No. Adrian, you have to throw that maid out. She dared to touch me. She needs to be punished." Adrian gently pried her hand away. "I've said it. Go to your room." "But, Veronica," just her name, and nothing more. Yet Adrian's voice turned so cold the entire room could feel it. Veronica went still. She stared at Adrian, then at Isla, hatred burning in her eyes, but she didn't dare argue again. She turned and hurried out of the room. When Veronica was gone, Adrian faced Isla. "You," he said. "Stay." Isla looked up, startled. "I'm not firing you," Adrian continued. "You protected someone else. That isn't a crime." Then he turned to Harrison and walked away, leaving Isla standing in the center of the living room with her heart racing. Maggie stepped forward on shaking legs and took Isla's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes bright with tears. "Thank you for protecting me." Isla looked at the older woman and gave her a small smile. "It's nothing, ma'am. I only did what was right." But inside her, a storm was rising. Adrian had looked at her, spoken to her, and in his eyes she'd seen something. A flicker of doubt, a question left unsaid. Did he recognize her? After 15 years? Isla didn't know. She only knew that from this moment on, everything had changed. She was no longer an invisible maid. She had stepped into the line of sight, Adrian's, Veronica's, and Harrison's. Meanwhile, in Adrian's office, Harrison set the stack of papers on the desk. "Sir," he said, his voice heavy, "I've been investigating for 2 years, and I found this." Adrian looked down at the pages. His eyes widened. It was a printout of an email Veronica Hayes had sent to a private investigator 3 years earlier. That night, Isla couldn't sleep. She lay on her bed, staring up at the black ceiling, her mind spinning with thoughts of Adrian, of the way he had looked at her, of Veronica and the hatred burning in her eyes, of the uncertain future waiting just ahead. Close to 2 a.m, Ela decided to go down to the kitchen for a glass of water. She moved quietly through the dark hallway, careful not to make a sound, but when she pushed the kitchen door open, she stopped in surprise. The lights were still on. Maggie was sitting at the table, both hands wrapped around a cup of hot tea, her gaze fixed somewhere far away. "You're not asleep yet?" Isla asked softly. Maggie lifted her head and smiled when she saw her. "I'm old. I can't sleep much. And you? Why are you still up at this hour?" Isla sat down across from her. "I can't sleep either." Maggie stood, poured another cup of hot tea, and set it in front of Isla. "Drink. Chamomile. It helps you sleep." Isla thanked her and took a small sip. The gentle fragrance spread through her, carrying a little warmth into the cold, late-night air. They sat in silence for a while. Then Maggie spoke. "I have to thank you again," Maggie said, her voice trembling faintly. "In the 2 years I've worked here, no one has ever dared to stand up for me. Everyone is afraid. I'm afraid too. But you weren't." Isla shook her head. "I'm not brave, ma'am. I just couldn't stand there and watch an innocent person get hit. I've already—" She stopped, leaving the sentence unfinished. Maggie watched her, old eyes, but sharp. "You've been through something like that, haven't you?" Isla was quiet for a moment, then she nodded. 3 years ago, she said softly, "I was working as a maid in Boston. The lady of the house abused the staff. I spoke up, and I was framed, fired, smeared. No one believed me. After that, I learned that silence is the best way to survive." "Then why weren't you silent today?" Isla looked down at her tea. "I don't know. When I saw you about to be hit, I only thought of my foster mother. She's gentle like you. If anyone ever raised a hand to her, I'd never forgive myself for standing by and watching." Maggie rested her hand over Ila's and gave it a light pat. "Your foster mother?" she asked gently. "How is she?" Ela felt her eyes sting. "She has cancer. Late stage. I took this job because the pay is high, so I can afford her treatment." "You poor thing," Maggie sighed. "So young, and you've already carried so much." Isla tried to smile. "It's all right. I'm used to it." Maggie studied her for a long time, then spoke, her voice as light as breath. "You have the eyes of someone who suffered a great deal. I can see it. And that suffering didn't make you bitter. It made you more compassionate. That's something precious, my girl." Isla didn't answer. She only felt a tear slide down her cheek. Maggie stood and put a gentle arm around her shoulders. "No matter what happens, I'll stand with you," she said. "You're a good person. I believe that." The late night was quiet. 2 women sat in a warm kitchen, sharing pain and kindness in a world that could be cruel. Isla didn't know this would be the last peaceful moment before the storm arrived. The next morning, Adrian woke earlier than usual. He hadn't slept the night before. The email Harrison had handed him kept circling in his mind, those cold lines appearing every time he closed his eyes. "I need every piece of information about the night Adrian Blackwood was stabbed in 2009, about the alley, about the clinic, about the lullaby, about the red bracelet. I'll pay any price. Why would Veronica need to hire a private investigator to dig into her own memories? If she was truly the one who saved him, she should remember everything. She wouldn't need anyone to remind her. She wouldn't need to buy information." Adrian shook his head, trying to push the thoughts away. Maybe Harrison was wrong. Maybe there was some misunderstanding. Veronica was his savior, the woman he loved. He couldn't doubt her over a single email. But the seed of suspicion had been planted, and it was already beginning to sprout. He stood at the window of his study, looking down at the garden below, and he saw her, the new maid, Isla Monroe. She was sweeping fallen leaves, a thin figure with light brown hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Adrian didn't know why he noticed her. There was something about her that drew his attention. Not beauty. She wasn't breathtaking the way Veronica was, but something in her eyes, a familiarity he couldn't explain. Then she began to sing. Her voice was small, almost a whisper. But the window was open, and the wind carried the sound up to Adrian's ears. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." Adrian's heart began to beat faster. That song. The lullaby the girl from that rainy night had sung to him. He'd heard Veronica sing it hundreds of times. But something was different. Veronica sang the words correctly. "This Maid, though, and if that horse and cart fall down, you'll still be the sweetest little baby in town." Wrong. She sang it wrong, in the right place, at the right line, exactly the way the girl had sung it back then. Adrian felt as if someone had reached inside his chest and squeezed his heart until it couldn't breathe. He gripped the window frame, eyes fixed on the maid, singing in the garden. "Sir," Harrison's voice sounded behind him. Adrian turned. The old butler stood in the doorway, his expression grave. "Do you have time to talk?" Harrison asked. "About yesterday's email, and a few other things." Adrian nodded. The two of them sat in the chairs in the study. "I've been investigating for 2 years," Harrison began, his voice slow but steady. "From the day Miss Veronica appeared, I felt something wasn't right, but I didn't want to hurt you without proof." Adrian stayed silent, waiting. "Miss Veronica says she has a star-shaped birthmark behind her right ear, like the girl from that night," Harrison continued, "but I've watched carefully. For 2 years, she has no birthmark at all. Maybe it faded with time," Adrian said, his voice uncertain. Harrison shook his head. "Birthmarks don't fade, sir. And there's the email. Why would she need to hire a detective to investigate her own story? Why would she need to buy information about that night?" Adrian didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. "I can't claim anything for certain," Harrison said. "But I think you should be careful. And there's one more thing." "What?" Harrison looked Adrian straight in the eye. "The new maid, Isla Monroe. She knows the lullaby. She sings the wrong line in the right place. Exactly as you've told me. The girl from that night sang it." Adrian felt as if lightning had struck him. He turned his head back toward the window. Isla was still sweeping leaves in the garden, unaware she was standing at the center of a storm about to break. "You think?" Adrian whispered, his voice rough. "You think she is?" "I don't know," Harrison said. "But I think you should find out." Adrian closed his eyes. His heart felt torn in two. On one side was Veronica, the woman he had loved for 3 years. On the other was the truth he was afraid to face. But he knew Harrison was right. He had to find out, no matter how much the truth might hurt. The conversation between Adrian and Harrison was cut off by the sound of the gate bell. Not the normal chime, but a rapid, relentless ringing, as if whoever was pressing it was desperate or furious. Harrison stood and looked out the window. Someone's demanding to come in. The guards are holding him back. Adrian rose as well. From the study window, he saw a man standing at the gate, tall and lean, hair a tangled mess, clothes wrinkled as if he'd been traveling a long time. The man was shouting something at the guards, a thick file clutched in his hand. Harrison's radio crackled. The guard's voice came through from the gate. "Sir Harrison, there's a man insisting on seeing Miss Veronica Hayes. He says his name is Daniel Porter. He won't leave. He says it's important. Life or death." Harrison looked at Adrian. Adrian frowned. Daniel Porter. The name meant nothing to him. "He wants to see Veronica?" Adrian asked. "Yes, sir. He says he knew her 5 years ago. In Boston. Boston. The place Veronica claimed she had lived before coming to New York." Something tightened in Adrian's chest. "Let him in," Adrian ordered. Harrison nodded and spoke into the radio. A few minutes later, the gate opened. Adrian and Harrison went down to the living room. Veronica was already there, seated on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. She lifted her head when she saw Adrian. "Darling," she smiled sweetly. "What is it?" "Someone wants to see you," Adrian said. "Daniel Porter. Do you know him?" Veronica's reaction caught Adrian's attention. She sprang to her feet. Her face went pale in an instant. Her blue eyes widened, full of fear, but she recovered quickly, hiding it behind a strained, practiced smile. "Daniel Porter? I don't know anyone by that name," she said, her voice faintly trembling. Adrian didn't miss the change. Just a second, but long enough for him to see it. Veronica was lying. The living room doors opened. A guard escorted the man inside. Daniel Porter was 34 years old, but he looked older. His eyes were bloodshot, heavy shadows under them as if he hadn't slept in days. His face was drawn, worn down by exhaustion and pain, but his gaze was sharp, cold, the gaze of a man carrying hatred like a blade. The moment he stepped into the room, Daniel's eyes locked on Veronica. He stared at her, jaw clenched, his fist crushing the file so hard his knuckles turned white. "You," Daniel said, the word hissing through his teeth. "I finally found you." Veronica took a step back. "I don't know who you are. You've got the wrong person." "Wrong?" Daniel let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "You think I'd forget your face after what you did to my sister?" Adrian stepped forward, placing himself between them. "Who are you, and what do you want?" Daniel turned to Adrian. Slowly, he pulled a crumpled newspaper from his coat, unfolded it, and held it out. It was the paper announcing Adrian and Veronica's wedding, their photographs side by side, Veronica smiling brightly. "I saw this last week," Daniel said, his voice thick with bitterness. "I couldn't believe my eyes. The person who killed my sister is living like a queen, about to marry a billionaire." "He's lying," Veronica screamed. "Adrian, don't listen to him. He's crazy." But Adrian didn't look at Veronica. He looked at Daniel. "Killed your sister?" Adrian asked slowly. "What are you talking about?" Daniel opened the file in his hands and pulled out a photograph, then gave it to Adrian. In the picture was a young woman, around 22. Brown hair, brown eyes, a gentle smile, pretty in a simple, honest way. "My sister," Daniel said, his voice catching. "Chloe Porter, 22 years old. She worked as a maid for the Hayes family in Boston 5 years ago." Adrian stared at the photo, then looked at Veronica. Her face was white as paper. "Hayes," Adrian whispered, his voice turning deadly cold. "I always knew there was a darkness behind your family name, Veronica. But I never imagined you were the one with blood on your hands." Veronica didn't answer. She stood shaking, lips moving, but no words coming out. Daniel went on, his voice cutting like steel. "Chloe worked for her family. She was beaten. She was tortured. Then one day, Veronica accused Chloe of stealing. She pushed my sister down the stairs." He stopped, drew a deep breath, fighting to hold himself together. "My sister suffered a brain injury. She was in the hospital for 3 days. Then she died." The room fell into a deadly silence. Adrian stood as if turned to stone. Harrison held his breath. Servants hovering at the doorway covered their mouths in horror. And Veronica Hayes, the beautiful fiancée of the Mafia boss, stood trembling in the center of the living room, as the dark past she'd tried to outrun finally caught up with her. Daniel pulled more documents from the file. His hands were shaking, but his voice stayed steady. This was the story he had replayed in his mind thousands of times over 5 years. This was the truth he had sworn to drag into the light. "My sister Chloe," Daniel began, his voice thick with grief. "She was the best girl I ever knew. 22 years old, just graduated college. She wanted to be a teacher, but my mother was seriously ill. We needed money for treatment. Chloe didn't have a choice. She had to work right away." He paused and swallowed. "She got a job as a maid for the Hayes family in Boston. A wealthy family, high pay. Chloe thought it was good luck. She didn't know it was hell." Daniel took out a small notebook, the cover worn and frayed. "This is Chloe's diary. She wrote in it every day. I found it after she died." He opened it and read aloud. "March 12th. Miss Veronica hit me again today, just because I looked her in the eye while speaking. She said I don't deserve to look at her. My cheek still hurts." Daniel turned a few pages. "April 20th. Miss Veronica made me kneel for 2 hours because I spilled water on the floor. My knees are bruised. I want to quit, but Mom needs the money. I have to endure." Daniel's voice began to tremble. "June 5th. Miss Veronica beat me with a clothes hanger because I wasn't clean the way she wanted. My back is bleeding. I'm so scared. I'm so scared of her, brother." He stopped reading. Tears ran down his face. Adrian stood motionless, like a statue. He looked at Veronica. She was backing toward the corner of the room, face drained white, lips trembling. "That's a lie," Veronica screamed. "He made it all up. Adrian, don't believe him." Daniel didn't even look at her. He pulled more papers from the file. "These are Chloe's messages to me," he said, handing Adrian a printed stack. "The last messages she sent before the day she died." Adrian took them and read. "Brother, I'm so scared. Miss Veronica is getting worse. Today she accused me of stealing a diamond ring. I didn't take it. I swear I didn't. But she won't believe me. She hit me. She said I have to confess or she'll kill me. Brother, what do I do? Adrian's hand tightened around the paper. He read the next message. Brother, I don't know how much longer I'll be alive. If something happens to me, remember this. Miss Veronica Hayes is the one who's hurting me. Promise me you'll get justice for me. Adrian lifted his head and looked at Daniel. What time was that message sent? He asked, his voice rough. 10 at night, Daniel replied. 6 hours later, Chloe was pushed down the stairs. Daniel pulled out another set of photos and laid them on the table. These are pictures of Chloe's bruises, taken at the hospital after she was brought into emergency. Adrian looked at the pictures, and nausea rose in his throat. Chloe's back was covered in bruises piled over one another. Some were old, yellowing at the edges. Some were fresh, dark, and purple. Her arms bore long lines, like she'd been struck with a whip. Her face was swollen, one eye blackened. These weren't the injuries of a single fall down a staircase. These were the marks of prolonged abuse. The doctors said Chloe suffered a brain injury from the fall, Daniel went on, his voice cutting like a blade. But the other bruises, the doctors said those were older injuries, days old, weeks old, even months. He stared straight at Veronica, hatred burning in his eyes. My sister was tortured for 3 months working for your family, and that day, when she refused to confess to a theft she never committed, you pushed her down the stairs. Veronica shook her head wildly. No, it was an accident. She fell. I didn't push her. Accident? Daniel roared. You call that an accident? My sister was in the hospital for 3 days. 3 days. She never woke up. My mother sat by her bed and cried until she had no tears left. Then Chloe died. 22 years old. She never got to live, never got to love, never got to be anything at all. Daniel's voice broke. And you know what your family did? They paid the hospital. They paid the police. They paid to silence everyone. They reported it as an accident. My sister died, and no one paid the price. The room sank into a heavy silence. The servants at the doorway were crying. Maggie covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Isla stood in a corner, her heart squeezed tight as if someone had wrapped a fist around it. She looked at Veronica and saw the devil behind the mask of an angel. Harrison stood still, his face stone cold. But inside him something was boiling. For 2 years he had suspected Veronica. For 2 years he had investigated, but he had never imagined the truth would be worse than anything he'd pictured. And Adrian stood in the middle of the room, the photos still in his hand, eyes fixed on nothing at all. He felt as if the whole world were collapsing beneath his feet. The woman he loved, the woman he believed had saved him, the woman he was going to marry. A killer. Slowly, Adrian turned his head toward Veronica, and for the first time in 3 years, he looked at her with the eyes of a stranger. Adrian couldn't stay in that room for another second. He turned and walked out of the living room without saying a word. He heard Veronica calling after him, her voice sharp with panic. But he didn't stop. He didn't turn back. He only kept moving, faster and faster, as if he were running from himself. He went up to the 2nd floor, down the long corridor, then pushed through a door and stepped onto the back balcony of the estate. The night wind cut cold across his face. Adrian stood there with both hands gripping the railing, staring down into the dark garden below. His chest hurt as if someone were crushing it in a fist. His mind spun with 1,000 thoughts. Veronica was a killer. She had tormented and killed an innocent young woman. She had hidden it for 5 years. And he had loved her, trusted her, planned to marry her. Adrian closed his eyes, fighting to hold back the pain tearing through his ribs. Then he felt it. The bracelet braided from red thread around his wrist. Worn. Faded. But still there, after 15 years. Slowly, Adrian lifted his hand and looked down at it, and memory came rushing back like a flood. That rainy night, the dark alley, the pool of blood spreading on the ground. A 13-year-old boy dying, certain he was about to disappear. Then the girl appeared, thin, soaked through, light brown hair stuck to her face with rain, but her eyes shone in the darkness, eyes that refused to give up. He remembered how she sacrificed her only protection against the freezing cold, just to keep his blood from spilling. She had dragged him through the rain, through the cold night, to the clinic. She had sung to him while he was slipping into the dark, a trembling voice, the wrong words at the end, but warm, gentle. Enough to keep him tethered to life. Keep it. It'll bring you luck. Adrian remembered the moment she placed the red thread bracelet in his palm, remembered her sad but warm smile, remembered the name she'd given him. Call me Star, because I like looking at the stars. 15 years. Adrian had searched for her for 15 years. Spent millions, hired countless investigators, all for the chance to find the person who had saved his life. Then Veronica had appeared with perfect proof, a story that seemed impossible to deny. He had believed she was his savior, and he had loved her because of it. But now he knew the truth. Veronica wasn't the one who saved him. Veronica was an imposter, a liar, a killer. 15 years, Adrian whispered, his voice raw. Have I been loving the wrong person? He stood there alone in the cold night, staring at the red thread as if he were staring into his own soul. Soft footsteps sounded behind him. Harrison came to Adrian's side, standing next to him on the balcony. He didn't speak. He only stood there, silent, like a companion in the dark. The two men stood together, looking out into the night. At last, Adrian spoke, his words like an exhale. You know, Harrison, I believed her. I believed her so much I would have died for her. Harrison didn't answer. He only rested a hand on Adrian's shoulder and gave it a steady, supportive squeeze. And Adrian knew that tonight, everything was going to change. The sound of an engine rose from the estate gate. Adrian and Harrison turned to look down. An old car shot into the courtyard and stopped with a shriek of brakes. The door flew open. A man stumbled out and rushed toward the front entrance. Adrian recognized him at once. Richard Hayes, Veronica's father. A 58-year-old man Adrian had met a few times at family dinners. But tonight, Richard Hayes looked nothing like himself. His face was slick with sweat. His hair was wild. His clothes were rumpled, as if he'd been wearing them for days without changing. He ran into the mansion, breathing hard, panic in every step. Adrian and Harrison moved quickly downstairs. By the time they reached the living room, Richard Hayes was already there. He stood in the center of the room, staring at Daniel Porter with fear in his eyes. Veronica ran to her father and grabbed his arm. Dad, tell them it was an accident. I didn't kill anyone. But Richard Hayes didn't look at his daughter. He looked at Adrian, and in his eyes Adrian saw something he hadn't expected. Guilt, regret, and surrender. Richard Hayes slowly sank to his knees. In the grand living room of the Blackwood estate, the 58-year-old man knelt before Adrian, head bowed, shoulders trembling. Mr. Blackwood, Richard said, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Veronica screamed. Dad, what are you doing? Get up. But Richard didn't rise. He lifted his face to Adrian, tears rolling down his cheeks. I hid my daughter's crime for 5 years, he said. I knew everything. I knew what she did to that girl, and I used money to silence everyone. Daniel Porter stepped forward, fists clenched. You admit it? You admit you helped cover up my sister's death? Richard nodded, his voice full of pain. Yes, I admit it. He turned to Daniel, eyes red. 5 years ago, my family was on the edge of bankruptcy. My company was collapsing. Debts were piling up. I'd lost almost everything. All I had left was the house in Boston and a little of my last savings. He paused and drew a deep breath. That night, when the girl fell down the stairs, my daughter called me. She was frantic. She said she had pushed the maid. She begged me to save her. Veronica shrieked, Dad, stop! Don't say any more. But Richard went on as if he hadn't heard her. I used my last money to buy silence. I paid the hospital. I paid the police. I paid the witnesses. I reported it as an accident. I covered it all up. He looked at Daniel, his voice shaking. Your sister died, and I helped my daughter escape. I was an accomplice. I know that. Daniel stood frozen. 5 years of searching for the truth. 5 years of fighting for justice. And now the man who had buried it was confessing in front of him. Adrian stepped closer, his voice cold as ice. Why did you hide it? Richard lifted his head to meet Adrian's gaze. Because my daughter begged me. Because I'm her father. Because I thought one mistake shouldn't destroy her entire life. He lowered his head. But I was wrong. Completely wrong. That wasn't an accident, and it destroyed someone else's life. Veronica lunged toward her father, dropping to her knees beside him, gripping his shoulders and shaking him. Dad, you promised you'd never tell. You promised you'd protect me. Richard looked at his daughter, tears spilling down. I protected you for 5 years, but I can't protect you forever. The truth has to be spoken. Veronica screamed, her voice wild. It was an accident. Dad, tell them. I didn't mean it. I only pushed her a little. I didn't know she'd fall. Richard shook his head slowly, and what he said next made the entire room go still. No, Veronica. You meant to push her. Veronica went rigid. You told me that night, Richard continued, his voice raw with pain. You said you were angry because she wouldn't confess. You said you wanted to teach her a lesson. You said you pushed her hard. He closed his eyes, as if he couldn't bear the weight of the memory. You pushed her at the top of the stairs. You watched her tumble down. You heard her head strike the steps, and you didn't call for help right away. You waited 30 minutes before you called. 30 minutes, Veronica. Those 30 minutes could have saved her. Veronica collapsed onto the floor, screaming through sobs. No, you're lying. You betrayed me. Adrian stood watching. The woman he had planned to marry was on her knees, crying like a child, and he felt nothing. No pity, no heartbreak, nothing at all. He looked at her with eyes that were completely unfamiliar, as if he were looking at someone he had never known. 3 years, Adrian said, his voice flat with cold. 3 years you were by my side, and I never knew I was sleeping next to a killer. Veronica lifted her head, eyes red, face soaked in tears. Adrian, I love you. I really love you. Please forgive me. Adrian didn't answer. He only turned away and walked out of the living room, leaving Veronica sobbing in despair behind him. Adrian hadn't even made it out of the room when Harrison spoke up. Sir, please wait a moment. There's one more thing you need to know. Adrian stopped. He turned back to the old butler. Harrison was holding the stack of papers he'd brought the night before, the stack they hadn't had time to go through because Daniel Porter had arrived. What else? Adrian asked, his voice exhausted. Harrison stepped forward and set the papers on the table. This is the evidence I've gathered over the past 2 years, he said. About Miss Veronica. About how she came to you. Veronica lifted her head from the floor, eyes wide with terror. No, Harrison, you don't have the right. Harrison didn't even look at her. He only looked at Adrian. You should read this. Adrian took the stack. The first page was a printed email. He read, Mr. Thompson, I need every piece of information about the night Adrian Blackwood was stabbed in 2009. I need the location of the alley. I need to know which clinic received him. I need to know about the song someone sang to him. I need to know about the red bracelet. I'll pay double if you can get me the information within 1 week. Veronica Hayes. Adrian's heart felt like a fist had closed around it. He flipped to the next page. It was the detective's reply. Miss Hayes, I've found the information you requested. The alley is behind the apartment building at 523 Atlantic Street, Brooklyn. The clinic is 2 blocks away. According to the hospital record, the victim arrived with severe blood loss and temporary bandaging made from cloth. There is no information about a song or a bracelet. However, I interviewed a nurse who worked that night. She remembers the victim repeatedly asking about a little girl. And on the victim's wrist, there was a bracelet braided from red thread. Adrian could feel his legs beginning to shake. He kept reading. The next page was a receipt from a craft shop. 1 bracelet braided from red thread. Requested to be aged, soaked in tea to fade the color. Customer, Veronica Hayes. Adrian went still. The red bracelet Veronica had handed him 3 years ago. The bracelet she claimed she'd kept for 12 years. The bracelet he had believed was proof no one could deny. Was fake, made to order from a description. Slowly, Adrian lifted his head and looked at Veronica. She was still kneeling on the floor, face white as paper, lips trembling without end. You, Adrian said, his voice like a whisper from hell. You lied to me for 3 years? Veronica shook her head wildly. No, Adrian, I can explain. Explain what? Adrian cut in, his voice beginning to shake. Explain hiring a detective to investigate the night I was stabbed? Explain ordering a fake red bracelet? Explain pretending to be my savior for 3 years? Veronica burst into tears. Adrian, I love you. I really love you. Love? Adrian let out a bitter laugh. You call that love? You lied to me. You used my pain. You pretended to be the one who saved my life just so I'd love you. He stepped closer, standing over Veronica, looking down at her with eyes cold as ice. I spent 12 years searching for my savior. 12 years. You knew that. You knew how badly I wanted to find the girl from that night. And you used it. Veronica looked up at him, tears streaming. Because I knew you'd never love me if I wasn't your savior. The words hit the room like lightning. Everything went still. Veronica continued, her voice breaking. I know you, Adrian. I know you don't trust anyone. You don't love anyone. Your heart froze the night you were abandoned. The only person you could ever love is the person who saved your life. The only person who could ever touch your heart is the little girl from that night. She sobbed hard. I just wanted you to love me. I just wanted to be with you. I didn't have another way. If I didn't pretend to be your savior, you never would have looked at me. Adrian stood there staring at Veronica, and he felt hollow. 3 years. 3 years he had loved her. 3 years he had believed she was the angel who saved his life. 3 years he had cherished her like a treasure. All of it was a lie. You're right, Adrian said, his voice flat with ice. I never would have loved you if you weren't my savior. But you know what? I also will never love a liar. A killer. A fraud down to the bone. He turned his back and started to walk away. Harrison, call the police. Veronica screamed after him. Adrian, don't leave me. I love you. I'm begging you. But Adrian didn't turn back. He walked out of the living room, leaving behind the wailing cries of the woman he had once loved. Veronica tried to scramble up and run after Adrian, but her heel caught on the hem of her dress, and she went down hard on the floor. The phone tucked in her pocket flew out, skidded across the marble, and stopped at Harrison's feet. The screen lit up. A message notification appeared. Harrison bent to pick up the phone. His eyes swept over the line on the screen, and he went utterly still. Sir? Harrison called after Adrian, his voice trembling. You need to see this. Adrian stopped and turned. He came back and took the phone from Harrison's hand. The message was from someone saved as Attorney Morrison. Miss Hayes, the prenuptial agreement has been drafted. Per the terms, after 1 year of marriage, if a divorce occurs for any reason, you will receive 50% of Mr. Blackwood's assets. I added the protective clause you requested. The plan is proceeding as intended. Adrian felt as if a knife had just been driven straight through his chest. He scrolled up and read the earlier messages. Attorney Morrison, I need an ironclad prenuptial agreement. Make sure I get 50% of his assets if we divorce. Don't let him suspect anything. And another message. Everything is going smoothly. He believes I'm his savior. Once we're married, it'll all be mine. Have the divorce papers ready after 1 year. Adrian finished reading, and his hand began to shake. It wasn't only deception. It wasn't only impersonation. Veronica had planned to take his fortune from the beginning. Slowly, he turned his head toward Veronica. She was still on the floor, eyes wide with terror as she saw the phone in Adrian's hand. She knew what he had read. Adrian, she whispered. I can explain. Explain? Adrian cut in, his voice cold as ice. Explain planning to marry me? Take half my assets? Then divorce me? Explain hiring a lawyer to draft a fraudulent contract? Explain how everything, from start to finish, was a scheme? Veronica went still. The silence in the room became heavy, crushing the last of her hope. She looked at Adrian, then at the evidence, and something inside her finally snapped. The mask of the grieving fiancé shattered into 1,000 pieces. Veronica didn't answer. She only stared at Adrian, tears pouring down her face, lips trembling. Then suddenly she laughed. A wild, bitter laugh. A scheme? Yeah, fine. It was a scheme. From the beginning, I wanted your money. I'm not your savior. I never really loved you. It was all for money. She pushed herself to her feet, eyes bloodshot, her voice sharp as a blade. You think I wanted to be the wife of a mafia boss? You think I like living in fear? Never knowing when you'll get shot dead? I only needed money. Money so I'd never have to live like a dog again. Adrian watched her in silence. Veronica kept shouting, as if she were vomiting up everything she'd kept locked away for years. What do you know about me? What do you know about my life? She let out a bitter laugh. When I was 18, my father went bankrupt. One day I was a rich girl. The next I was the child of a drowning debtor. My friends turned their backs on me. The ones who used to flatter me suddenly laughed in my face. They called me a beggar girl, a girl with no future. Tears ran down her cheeks, but her voice stayed full of hatred. My boyfriend, the boy I thought would stay with me forever, left the second he found out. He said he didn't love a poor girl. He said I wasn't worthy of him." Veronica closed her eyes, pain flooding back. That 18-year-old girl stood in the middle of a school courtyard, mocked by friends, abandoned by the boy she loved, turned away by the whole world. She cried until there was nothing left inside her. She wanted to die, but she didn't. She swore to herself she would never be poor again. Never. She would do anything to have money. Anything. Veronica opened her eyes and stared straight at Adrian. "I lived in hell for 12 years. I did every job. I swallowed every humiliation, just to survive. Then I heard about you, the Mafia boss searching for the savior from long ago, the man willing to give that savior everything." She gave a harsh smile. "I saw my chance. I took it. I don't regret it." Adrian stood there listening, and he understood. He understood what Veronica had been through. He understood why she had become what she was. He understood she was also a victim of circumstance, of poverty, of betrayal. But understanding wasn't forgiveness. "I understand," Adrian said, his voice low and tired. "I understand you suffered. I understand you were hurt. But that doesn't give you the right to kill. It doesn't give you the right to lie. It doesn't give you the right to destroy other people's lives." He looked Veronica straight in the eyes. Chloe Porter was poor too. She suffered too. She worked as a maid to care for a sick mother. But she didn't kill anyone. She didn't deceive anyone. She was only trying to live with decency. And you killed her. Veronica lowered her head. No words came. Adrian turned and walked away. "You chose your road," he said without looking back. "Now you live with the consequences." Veronica's crying rose behind him, but this time Adrian didn't stop. He didn't turn around. He didn't hesitate. Because even if he understood her past, he still couldn't forgive her. Not ever. Adrian was about to walk out of the room when Harrison spoke again. "Sir, please wait. There's one more thing. The most important thing." Adrian stopped and turned toward the old butler. Harrison didn't look at him. He was looking toward the corner of the room, where Isla stood in silence, head lowered, as if she could make herself disappear. "Miss Monroe," Harrison said, gentle but clear. "Please come here." Isla startled. She lifted her head, eyes wide with surprise. "Me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What do I have to do with this?" Harrison didn't answer. He only watched her with those old, sharp eyes, the eyes of a man who had lived long enough to see straight through people. Isla hesitated, then slowly stepped forward into the center of the room. Adrian looked at her, the frail maid with light brown hair and sorrowful eyes, the girl who had dared to hold Veronica's wrist to protect Maggie, the girl who felt strangely familiar to him. "Miss Monroe," Harrison said, "please show me behind your right ear." Isla went still. Her face blanched in an instant. Her hand rose without thinking, covering her ear. I don't understand what you want," she said, her voice shaking. Maggie suddenly spoke from behind them. "Isla," she said gently, "that song you sing when you work, that lullaby, where did you learn it?" Isla turned to the older cook, confusion in her eyes. "What song?" "Hush, little baby," Maggie said. "You sing it every day, and you sing the last part wrong." Adrian felt his heart begin to race. He stepped closer, stopping in front of Isla. She took a step back, as if she was afraid of him. "You know that song?" Adrian asked, his voice rough. Isla didn't answer. She stood there, lips pressed tight, eyes fixed on the floor. Adrian drew a slow breath, then he began to sing. His voice was low, trembling, almost a whisper. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." He stopped and looked at Isla. "Do you know the next part?" Isla lifted her eyes. Her gaze met Adrian's, and for that one breath of time, it felt as if the world stopped, 15 years earlier. Rain, a dark alley, a boy dying, a thin little girl, and a lullaby. Isla opened her mouth. Her voice came out small, shaking, nearly swallowed by the air. "And if that mockingbird won't sing, Mama's gonna buy you a diamond ring." She kept singing, line by line, word by word, until she reached the end. "And if that horse and cart fall down, you'll still be the sweetest little baby in town." Wrong words. Right place. Right line. Exactly like 15 years ago. Adrian stood frozen. He'd heard Veronica sing that song hundreds of times. She always sang it perfectly. the correct words, because she'd memorized it from whatever the detective had fed her. But the girl from that night hadn't sung it right. She'd sung it wrong, because she hadn't learned it from a book. She'd only half remembered it from childhood, and the woman standing in front of him now sang it wrong too. In the same place. In the same way. You, Adrian breathed, his voice barely there. You are. Harrison stepped in. He laid a gentle hand on Isla's shoulder. Miss Monroe, he said softly, please allow me. Isla didn't resist. She stood as still as stone while Harrison carefully swept her light brown hair aside, revealing the skin behind her right ear. And there it was. A star-shaped birthmark, small, light brown, sitting just behind her right ear. Adrian saw it, and it felt as if the air had been pulled from his lungs. 15 years. 15 years of searching, millions spent, investigators hired, streets walked, names asked, and she was here. Right in front of him, working as a maid in his own home. Adrian slowly dropped to his knees. In the grand living room, in front of everyone, the most powerful Mafia boss in New York knelt before a frail maid. You, he said, his voice breaking. You were the little girl that night. You're the one who saved me. Isla looked down at him, tears beginning to slide down her cheeks. Why didn't you tell me? Adrian asked, his voice like a sob. You knew who I was. You saw the red bracelet on my wrist. You knew Veronica was an imposter. Why didn't you say anything? Isla stood there trembling, tears pouring down her face. She said, her voice cracking. I wanted to, but I didn't dare. Why? Isla closed her eyes, as if she were trying to endure something too heavy to hold. Because no one would believe me. No one ever believes me. Her voice broke with grief. I'm just a poor maid, and she's your fiancée. She's been by your side for 3 years. She has everything. What do I have? Only my memory. Who would believe me? Who would listen? Adrian stayed on his knees, looking up at her, his heart ripping open. 15 years. The girl who had saved him 15 years ago. And 15 years later, she still had no one she could trust. Still alone. Still left behind. Just like he had been back then. Isla stood there, looking down at Adrian on his knees before her, and she couldn't hold it in anymore. The tears broke loose like a dam giving way, carrying with them all the suffering she'd kept hidden for so many years. You don't understand, she said, her voice choked. You don't know what my life has been. She wiped at her cheeks with the back of her hand, but the tears wouldn't stop. 3 years ago, I was a maid for a family in Boston. The mistress beat the staff every day. I saw it. I couldn't take it. I spoke up. Bitterness crept into her voice. And do you know what happened? She framed me for stealing. She fired me. She ruined my name everywhere. No one believed me. Not one person. Isla closed her eyes as the memories came rushing back, sharp and bruising. I lost my job. I lost my dignity. I lost my faith in anything at all. So you see, Adrian? I had nothing but a memory. And in a world of power like yours, a maid's memory isn't proof. It's a death sentence. After that, I learned that silence is the only way to survive. Don't speak. Don't accuse anyone. Don't hope anyone will believe you. She opened her eyes and looked at Adrian. When I came here, I recognized you immediately. I saw the red bracelet on your wrist. I knew Veronica was an imposter. I wanted to tell you. I wanted to so badly. Tears slid down her chin, but I was afraid. I was afraid it would happen again. What happened in Boston. Isla's voice cracked. And my foster mother is very sick. I need this job. I need the money for her treatment. If I spoke up and no one believed me, I'd be fired. My mother would die. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't. She broke into sobs. I'm sorry. I know I'm a coward. I know I should have said something sooner. But I couldn't. I was too afraid. Adrian stayed there listening to every word, and he understood. He understood what she had endured. He understood how deeply she had been hurt. He understood why she chose silence. Because she was like him once. Alone. Abandoned. Unheard. Disbelieved. Adrian slowly rose to his feet and stepped toward Isla. She retreated, as if she expected him to blame her. But Adrian didn't blame her. He held her. In the grand living room, in front of everyone, the coldest Mafia boss in New York pulled a frail maid into his arms, and he cried. For the first time in 15 years, Adrian Blackwood cried, the tears he had swallowed since the night his father left him bleeding in a dark alley. The tears he had buried while he built an empire with blood and other people's pain. The tears he'd thought had dried up long ago. They poured out now, down his cheeks, onto Isla's shoulder. "I've been searching for you for 15 years, Adrian whispered, his voice breaking. "I spent millions, hired investigators, went everywhere, asked everyone." He held her tighter. "And you were here, right in front of me, in my own house." Isla stood in Adrian's arms, trembling. She didn't know what to do, what to say. She only stood there and cried with him. "You saved my life," Adrian said. "You gave me the only warmth you had left on that godforsaken night. You were shivering, yet you stayed. You chose to save a stranger when the whole world had already left him to die." The entire room fell into silence. Harrison stood there with reddened eyes, quietly wiping away tears. He'd been with Adrian for 13 years. He had never once seen his master cry, until today. Maggie sobbed soundlessly, hand over her mouth. The other servants cried too. Daniel Porter stood still, tears sliding down his face even though this wasn't his story. Even Richard Hayes lowered his head, not daring to look. Veronica was the only one who didn't cry. She stood in the corner, face white as bone, watching Adrian hold Isla with eyes full of hatred and despair. But no one cared about her anymore, because in the center of that room, two people had found each other again after 15 years. Adrian and Isla. The boy who had been abandoned, and the girl who had saved him. The Mafia boss, and the poor maid. They held each other and cried. For 15 years of distance. For everything they had suffered. For the moment they finally found their way back to each other. That night, the police came to the Blackwood estate. Adrian stood and watched as they put handcuffs on Veronica Hayes. She screamed and cried and begged, but he didn't soften. He had given her everything. Love, trust, a future. And she had returned it with lies and deception. Daniel Porter stood beside him, watching Veronica being led into the police car. For 5 years he had waited for this moment. For 5 years he had fought for justice for his sister. And at last, justice was being served. Richard Hayes was taken as well for questioning. He was an accomplice in covering up Chloe Porter's death. He would have to pay for his silence. When the police cars drove away, Adrian turned to look at Isla. She stood in the corner of the courtyard, thin and fragile, as if a single gust of wind could blow her away. He walked to her. "Stay here tonight," he said gently. "We'll talk in the morning." Isla nodded without speaking. 1 week later, Adrian stood outside a hospital room, looking through the glass. Inside, an older woman lay on the bed, her face pale but peaceful. Martha, Isla's foster mother. He had paid every hospital bill. He had hired the best doctors. He had made sure she received the best care possible. Isla stood beside him, eyes red. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Adrian shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. 15 years ago, you saved my life. I owe you more than this." He reached into his pocket and took out something small, the bracelet braided from red thread. Worn, faded, yet still intact after 15 years. "You gave me this bracelet that night," Adrian said. "You told me it would bring me luck." And it did. He gently took Isla's hand and placed the bracelet into her palm. "Now I'm giving it back to you, along with the thank you I've owed you for 15 years. Isla looked down at the bracelet, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I have a proposal," Adrian continued. "Stay at the Blackwood estate, not as a maid, but as someone I want to truly know." Isla lifted her head, startled. "I don't want to rush," Adrian said. "I just want the chance to be near you, to understand you, to make up for 15 years you had to live alone." Isla looked at him for a long time. Then she smiled, her first smile since she'd come to the Blackwood estate. "Yes," she said, "I'll stay." 6 months later, Veronica Hayes was sentenced to 15 years in prison for manslaughter, fraud, and conspiracy to seize assets. She wailed in the courtroom, but no one pitied her. Justice had been done. Richard Hayes was sentenced to 3 years for concealing a crime. He lost everything: money, reputation, even his daughter. Daniel Porter finally found peace. He built a new grave for his sister, brought fresh flowers every week. He began a new life, no longer crushed beneath the weight of the past. Martha recovered. A miracle happened. She was discharged and returned to live in a small, beautiful home Adrian had bought for her and Isla. As for Adrian and Isla, They didn't rush into love. They began with friendship, with trust, with long conversations late into the night. Adrian slowly opened up, less cold, less distant. Isla slowly grew more confident, no longer lowering her head to anyone. One night, they sat on the mansion balcony, watching the stars. "Do you remember?" Adrian asked. "That night, you told me to call you Star, because you liked looking at the stars." Isla smiled. "I remember. Back then, I thought stars were the most beautiful thing in the world, because they shine in the dark." Adrian looked at her, his eyes gentle. "You're like that too," he said. "You shone in my darkness." Isla gave a quiet laugh and didn't answer. She only rested her head on Adrian's shoulder and looked up at the sky filled with stars. And for the first time in a very long time, both of them felt peace. The story of Adrian and Isla teaches us that sometimes people spend their whole lives searching for something precious, not realizing it is standing right in front of them. Truth doesn't need makeup. Real love doesn't need an imposter. And kindness, no matter how small, will be repaid in its own time. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, hit like, and share this video so more people can hear meaningful stories like this every day. How did this story make you feel? Did it remind you of someone in real life? Leave a comment below and share what's in your heart. We'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching. Wishing you and your family good health, joy, and peace each day. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.